Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. I'm Emmanuel, I'm an airline pilot, and welcome to our taxi tutorial in the JustFlight Avro RJ. In this tutorial we are going to make our way from the parking position to our departure runway, and we are going to talk about a couple of basics of taxiing this aircraft. But first of all, let's start with a really useful tip. If you have a Navigraph subscription, go to the charts and the en route chart and zoom in all the way. That way you get your moving map down here, which just comes in really handy for taxiing your aircraft. Really much recommended to use this. Alright, once our taxi clearance is received, we can release our parking brake and we can turn on the taxi lights, which is moving the landing light switches to the forward position and the runway exit lights to on. When all of that is done, let's go ahead and initiate our taxi. To do so, we need around 30% of thrust depending on the weight. Once the plane is moving, we do a brake check and we observe the brake pressure indication down here to verify that we are indeed on the yellow system, which is the primary brake system that we are going to use. Standard taxi speeds in the RJ, 10 knots on 10 knots in turns, 15 knots on aprons, 30 knots on straight lines, and 50 knots when backtracking a runway. Be especially careful as you're going around turns, as the aircraft can develop quite a bank angle quite easily. Now the RJ is not that big of an aircraft. A little bit of oversteering needs to be used, like I'm doing right now. But in general, you can follow the taxi lines pretty closely, even with your nose wheel. If we take into consideration the general dimensions of the aircraft, you will notice that the RJ100, which is the largest, requires the most oversteering, while the 85 and the 70 require less oversteering, as the nose wheel and the main wheel are closer to one another. In general though, the aircraft size is not too large, and therefore you only require minimal oversteering in order to keep your main wheels down on the center line. I do recommend to use the ground speed indication on the nav display that you can see down in the bottom right over here, and if you don't know how to bring that up, you can do it through the data switch down here. So by default, if this is off, just press the data switch once, and then you are going to get the ground speed indication. If you already have a different indication, just press data again a couple of times until you will eventually reach the ground speed. I do recommend that you make yourself familiar with the way the airplane feels during taxi and the way a certain speed looks like when you're looking outside, especially when you're used to flying aircraft where you're sitting a lot higher, such as the 777 or the A380. So that you can get a good feeling for how fast you're actually going. The primary reference during taxi is always to look outside rather than inside, so you should really develop that feeling for your aircraft speed. As we're approaching a turn, like we are doing right now, going to turn right on Alpha over here, gradually and smoothly slow your aircraft down. It does react rather early when you tip the brake pedals, so be sure that you start with a very nice and gentle tip on the pedals to get it down to 10 knots when you're approaching a turn. Normally with the thrust in idle, the aircraft maintains the speed rather nicely. However, occasionally a little bit of thrust may be required, especially when going uphill.
10.
Nope, not yet. Okay, as we're back on a straight line, we can add a little bit of power again to get the aircraft moving. Now, as we are taxiing towards the departure runway, there are also a couple of checks that we need to do. The first of them is going to be the takeoff configuration check, and for this we've got a button located down here, which reads config check. When we press this button, nothing should come up, which indicates that all parameters are okay for our takeoff. Now, let me just mistrim the aircraft so that I can show you what it looks like if you are outside of one of the takeoff parameters. Now our trim is outside the green range, and you can hear that we are getting several warnings as this happens. We get the master warning, get a takeoff config alert, and you also get to hear the horn telling us that we are unsafe for our takeoff. So let's go back to our takeoff trim setting, and when that is done, let's do the config check again. If you don't hear anything, that indicates to you that your takeoff configuration is normal. Last but not least, as we are approaching the departure runway and as we are getting ready for takeoff, alert the cabin crew by pressing the cabin call button up here. So you could hear the seats for departure call in the background, and in a moment the cabin crew is also going to advise us once the cabin is completely ready.
Cabin is secure.
Here you go. So with that, we now know that our cabin is ready and that we are completely prepared for our departure, and we can commence our lineup and takeoff. Those are going to be for a separate dedicated video though. So with this, I would like to thank you very much for watching. Hope that you have learned something today. Last but not least, when you really like the video, be sure to leave a like in YouTube as well, as it does really help out the channel. Comment to let me know what you think about it, and subscribe if you're up for more. Finally, if you really like what I'm doing on this channel, I would appreciate a small donation through the Buy Me a Coffee link in the video description below. Thank you for watching, and see you all again on the next one.